Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Ernest, our Center's Adjunct Assistant Professor, to present on the topic From Tradition to Innovation, Wisdom-Oriented Education in Buddhist Theory and Practice. So please give a big hand to warmly welcome Dr.
We can do without full screen as well. Venerable Dhamma Jyoti, Venerable Hin Hong, Mr. Tam, fellow colleagues and friends, good afternoon. I think one is special also, my greetings to our POCOG principal, vice principals, and teachers here. Because of them, the Tung unit, we are celebrating our 19th anniversary of education service. So special welcome to them as well. Today, I think my topic of discussions is a good reflections also on the topic we have today in terms of the wisdom oriented education, but I think also particularly with reference to some more contemporary discussions or some applicational aspects of these discussions. And in view of the 19th anniversary of Tung Yuen Education Service, probably it's also quite fitting to use our experience as an example to highlight some of the key points I would like to share with you. I think the benefit of speaking in the middle of it is of the conference is we have great keynotes and other professor has pretty much set the stage. I would say some of the key concept has already been well discussed in terms of wisdoms, in terms of the differences or the kind of similarities between wisdom and knowledge. We have, I think, now have a pretty good foundations of it. I think, of course, when we're talking about wisdom-based education, it would be quite helpful also to differentiate sometime when we talk about from the Buddhist perspective, what do we mean by kind of worldly knowledge and the transcendency above it. Sometimes we call it wisdoms, or I think basically the idea is that when we listen to the teachings of the Buddha and also maybe wisdom inspired and based education, we need to distinguish some of the reference actually refer to how do we live on a daily worldly perspective, and some of it is like how we can transcend above our mundane life and how do we go beyond our current form of existence. From the sutta perspective, I think many of us will be familiar with the two very important sutta. The first discourse of the Buddha, turning the Dharma wheel. The first teachings of the Buddha has already been talking about, I think, what we refer to as wisdoms, the Four Noble Truths. And then I think another very interesting, very important text also, the Kalama Sutta, also talk about how the teachings of the Buddha, or the wisdom, so to speak, is actually distinctly different from the customs, the legends, the traditions, or the scripture, or the standard kind of like the expectations that sometimes people would refer to. So we need to actually have a stronger kind of understandings of what are the teachings really leading to the cessations of suffering. Of course, I think the topic of the discussions today is what we mean by wisdom-based. The wisdom-based, I think here I highlight a few points here. Of course, it's like the building up on the wisdom realized through the truth of the Dharma. And wisdom, I think from a lot of the discussions, we particularly refer to the dependent arising, the impermanence, selflessness, and how do we transcend above it, the awakening process. I think Venerable Dhamma Jyoti also mentioned like the unfolding of our existence. I would also here, I think, highlight the threefold training. I think many of you, again, like very familiar with it, of wisdoms, moral discipline, and mental concentrations. We call it the kind of the noble path. Basically, this is actually what being practices and taught as the practice, the experience of the noble ones. So it's something not only as a knowledge or kind of a fact to know, but also something to practice, to be embodied. So I will also argue here the teachings of the Buddha or the wisdom-based education would be something of wisdom and also of practice. So it is quite important, I think, while we're talking about wisdom-based, it's also important to talk about the other two aspects of moral discipline and also of mindfulness or mental concentration. I think which many of our previous speakers and professor has addressed quite a lot of it as well. So here, I, as I mentioned, I try to highlight wisdom-based is also FIFO training based. So like when we think about the kind of the formulations of the FIFO training, basically it is building up on the Buddhist understandings of human, mental, and bodily activities, and how we can build up on these understandings to I would say probably adjust or also kind of transform human experience and behavior, so to speak. I don't know whether it's fitting to put it kind of in the unfolding category, but it's definitely through this deeper understanding of our mental and bodily activities, then we can change, we can transform and flourish, I think, for lack of a better word. So the purpose of education, if I try to summarize, would definitely, some of the more kind of contemporary term will refer to growth, transformations, flourishing. I think one particular term that we use quite often in the Buddhist context is like transcendency. So the wisdom base, of course, as I mentioned, the wisdom is building up on the understandings of dependent arising. But also, I think because of this understanding of dependent arising, we have a much better understanding of human minds and how our minds operates and how our minds is actually malleable and wieldable. That is actually quite important, because if you think of, I think many of our teachers would experience that if we think of human characters or mindset is fixed, then the purpose or the effort of educations or personal development would be actually quite futile. But because of our understanding of human minds and also character building, then they're actually very hopeful. I think particularly, I think that is the message and perhaps assurance from the Buddha that we can grow, we can transcend, we can transform, both from our mental activities or from our kind of a body behavioral perspectives. Right view would be very important, I think, particularly in the context of wisdom-based education. That formulations of impermanence, sufferings, and non-self is a kind of the cornerstones of Buddhist teachings. I think with that understandings of self, then we can actually build a much better understandings of others and the external world, and also most importantly is our relationship with the external world. I think the bulk of the challenges or the sufferings that we are encountering, not only for the students or those who are growing up encountering the world, is the conflict of our understanding of what the reality or the external world is. Not to mention the challenges and the difficulty understanding ourselves, our emotions, and our own kind of mental behavior. That is not easy at all. The other context of right view is like when we talk about selflessness or non-self, sometimes it's also in the process of secular educations. We try to build up personal characters, we try to build up their own identity. But that kind of building up process, to some extent also would, I wouldn't say conflicting, but also to some extent, Buddhist teachings have different perspectives. Buddhist teachings definitely have a different and deeper understandings of the selves, the notions of self, and how do we actually see the construct of identities, ego, and how do we interact with one another. So as I mentioned earlier, the Buddhist wisdom is definitely more than knowledge, and definitely there are a lot more discussions about our moral discipline and also our mental concentration. I think to use some of the more kind of modern terminology, then it would be actually holistic, or I think sometimes we use is like a full human education. So it's not only on knowledge, but also how character are being built and how they interact and perceive the world. here on the left, I sometimes trying to attempt to really dissect the core essence of Buddhist teachings from the ontological perspectives, like epistemology perspective, and also soteriology perspective, because I think the Buddhist teachings is fundamentally different from the worldly knowledge in terms of how we see our identity, our existence, the theory of knowledge, and also ultimately the theory of sufficiency, like how we attain happiness. We don't have a lot of time here, so I think briefly what I'm trying to say here, from the ontological perspective, our identity, the Buddhist teachings will actually inspire us to think about our relationship, our interconnectedness with other beings, like not only humans, but also the ecologies, the communities. And here I put in self on demand, because sometimes I think about bodhisattva, they can express in many different forms to the benefits of human beings. When you think about teachers, sometimes they are mentors, sometimes they are caretaker, sometimes they have to be maybe even like a parent to really kind of deliver the kind of educations and care and support a student would require. That is kind of what I mean by self on demand. Like if we fixated on certain identities, sometimes we hold on to so tightly, it would be not helpful to our student, and also it would not be helpful to our interactions with other beings as well. The epistemology, in terms of the theory of knowledge, of course, I think we talk about views, we talk about understanding. Like sometimes we have a lot of ideas, concept that is actually fixated and leading to a lot of conflict and even like extremism. I think the contributions of Buddhist wisdom-based education is actually to allow us to transcend above views, to establish the right views that would leading us to understand the fundamental dependent arising of views, and not kind of attached to view and causing us a lot of sufferings and the sufferings of other people. And then of course, like finally, how do we be happy? I think everyone would like our new generations, our students, and our community to be happy, but what is actually the source of happiness? Or sometimes we say, if we're not trying to focus too much on happiness, how about the cessations of suffering? Of course, the Buddhist notion is not achieving happiness through grasping or cravings. The Buddhist teachings will inspire us to achieve happiness or to be embark upon the path of cessation of sufferings through a deeper understanding of the wisdoms of the Buddhist teachings, and also practicing the moral concentrations of mindfulness, so that our mind is truly free and freeness, because we are not bounded by our craving and attachment. So the right view is definitely an important element of the Buddhist wisdom-based educations. And I think one of the contributions I would like to attempt to focus on is that, like, how right view and this Buddhist-based, wisdom-based educations is not in conflict with innovations. I think Professor Harkis just mentioned like how we can stick to certain kind of principles of translations and at the same time attempts to innovate. I think one very inspiring viewpoints from the Buddhist teachings is like if we can free ourselves from the fixations of views, we can actually transcend above our different kind of particular opinions or kind of identities, but at the same time allow us actually have the flexibilities to see a lot more. Here I'm quoting Professor Karunadasa. He's saying that basically the inspirations of Buddhist teachings is a lot of possibilities. Like only when there is change, there is possibility of changeability. It's kind of a convoluting, but in a way that we need to appreciate how plastic and malleable and wieldable and amenable that our mind could be, and hence like we have the possibility of elevating, but to some extent, if in this unfortunate events, like we may descend to some undesirable outcome. But the key difference is like how we can establish a deep understanding of wisdom and building up on which we conduct morally and building up on our mental concentrations in order to sustain the threefold training. So I think my argument here is wisdom-based educations and the right view of the Buddhist teachings is contributive to creativities, innovations. Like we can help ourselves think out of the box. It's not trying to get all the data or everything we know, but to really trying to understand the connectivities, like the dependent arisings of things, so that we can see, I think from the Mahayana traditions, we would say how we can see the universe through a petals. I think that is particularly, I would say, mind-blowing in a sense that sometimes when we think of wisdom and knowledge in the modern days, we try to get all the data or all the big data we need. But the Buddhist teaching is like, why don't we understand how the world operates, how the world connect with one another, and how thoughts communicate, so that we understand the dependent arising, and then we can see universe from or through a petal. So I think another area that I would like to explore is I think many of you would probably heard of the last decade or so. There are a lot of discussions about the growth mindset. Carol Drake, like she is definitely like one of the kind of pioneer in education, pretty well recognized for her work in growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I think basically her argument is like, if you can, here I quote, like, individuals who believe in their talent can be developed, have a growth mindset, and then they tend to achieve more than those who with a more fixed mindset. This is because like they have a lot of these building, have a lot of blocks. I think not only in the thoughts or behavior that hinder their growth process and their development. I think there is another interesting article from her on Harvard Business Review. Basically, her argument is also, like, even though we talk about growth mindset, don't think of it as the panacea of, okay, now the children or the student can grow, then like they will be able to develop and they will excel by themselves. Or just like think of this kind of optimism about growth, then we don't need to do anything and growth will come by itself. It's exactly not what she is trying to advocate. I think the message that she have is like, you see the possibility of change, of growth, but like you need to actually facilitate it. I think as an educator, you need to kind of break down the barrier or the hindrance or the obstacles of a fixed mindset and facilitate the possibility of a growth mindset. But meanwhile, we need to contribute to all the factors contributing to human development and flourishment, or maybe the unfolding that we talk about. And then of course, I think one teachings that I always bear in mind, I think particularly it relates to moral cultivation, is that the Buddha taught, like, if there were even a tiny portion as small as a pinch of dust that is permanent and not subject to change in human mental and material construction, the Buddha said the practice of higher life would be no avail. Sometimes the example I try to give my class is like, if you imagine no matter how hard you try, I will still give you a C. No matter like how hard you write your paper and prepare your study, you're not going to get a B, you're just going to get a C. I think everyone will be devastated. Of course, we're not talking about like everyone getting a C, but what if you say no matter how hard you try, you will never be able to get an A. There is like still certain perfections that you need to try to overcome, or difficulties or obstacles that you try to overcome, but you will never get there. That would be frustrating. And then like you say, okay, like no matter how hard I try, I'm already 98 out of 100, but there are still like the last 2 points you're not going to get. I think that is actually not the message or the teachings of the Buddha. The teachings of the Buddha and probably the inspirations from the Buddha is there are a lot of potentials to growth. And I think that's why the the wisdom-oriented educations will allow and see the possibility in human and I think personal and individual development. So the last bit, I'm not quite sure how much time I still have because I think probably around like 15 or 20 minutes past. But the last bit, I'm trying to share with you our experience from the Tung Yuen perspectives and how the last like 90 years would mean, like particularly in the context of our discussions about whole person education, moral developments, and so on and so forth. Here, I'm quoting here in Chinese, unfortunately, but I'm trying to translate to you very quickly. I think basically our founder, Carol Lin Kok, her when she shared about the reason why she aspired to found and build Tung called Yuen and the education services, she was thinking, like back then, because of the whole context about war and the social calamities, that like if we really want to salvage all these, like without the Buddha Dharma, it's nearly impossible. There's no other ways. However, religion is on the decline. It cannot be rise back and reach out to the populations. Hence, like if we want to make the Dharma and the teachings of the Dharma alive, we need to depend on educations to nourish and to nurture human talent. And that's why she aspires to embark up on educational service. And here she has like another paragraph which I call, she believed that all people have equal potential. They were gifted, but however, because of poverty or for whatever reason, they don't have the opportunity to be educated, and that's why they cannot develop their intellect to the full capabilities, and they may probably would not fully make their life to the fullest potential and meaningful. And that's why she thinks, like for these situations and possibilities, she want to actually put on a lot of resources to build the talent and to introduce introductory levels of the Dharma so that people can understand causality, understand cause and consequence. At home, you want them to be like a good son. And then for nations, you want good citizens so that there will be harmony and goodwill across society and alleviate all the cruelty and violence so that we can change the world. That is like from Lady Kara's perspective, that is actually the fundamental essence of changing human mindset, and that is actually the way to do it. And then, of course, finally, why she was thinking about educations for girls, because girls are basically the mothers of the nations. If they are well educated, then you have good family and you have a good society. So that's why I here would use the example to illustrate and maybe like argue that the Buddhist wisdom-oriented educations in a contemporary society is actually also consistent with what we talk about in terms of holistic or whole person education, which is also building up on morality and also the other teachings and trainings of the Buddhist wisdoms. And another kind of aspects I want to share with you is like when we talk about innovations, that also kind of resonate with some of the key message from our speaker, where one of the founding philosophies of our education service and also Tung Yuen as a whole is building up on one of the axiom that we usually say is like new knowledge, traditional practice. What Venerable Tung meant is that he think like when it comes to the means or the knowledge to help and alleviate the sufferings, then we can upkeep with the contemporary needs and development. But however, the fundamental core essence and practice of how we actually nourish human minds should always be the same. I think that's what he was referring to in terms of the traditional practice. And when Venerable Tung, he was referring to the aspirations of Lady Kara. He was mentioning that like back in his time, there were a lot of conflict. Like it seems like if we are comparing different school of thoughts, you always try to high praise like one school and then you're trying to talk down the others. But in reality, I think what is actually most important is like for the monastics and also for the lay practitioners to have the moral ground, like the moral base, building up on which you could have new knowledge to facilitate and support the changes you're seeing in the contemporary world. So that's why I think hopefully with this example and also that experience that we can illustrate like how wisdom-oriented educations could also inspire innovations without losing sight of lineage and values. I think that is also very important. And then final bit, I also put it as a kind of tribute to our colleagues, our principal, vice principal, and teachers here. I think ultimately, one of the aspirations from our founders and also most recently our honorable chairman, thinking about the education services building up on the inspirations of the Buddhist teachings and also the wisdom, it is really how to spread or how to inspire people in terms of benevolence and also compassion. I think Venerable Dharma Jyoti earlier mentioned, and also other speakers also mentioned, the significance and importance of not only knowledge and wisdom, but also compassion. We can think of like these days, our teachers actually facing so many challenges. It's not only kind of a transfer of knowledge and experience, but also like you require a lot of patience and compassion. We have a duplet, like if you look at, visit our school, we have a duplet here in Chinese, I put on the second bullet, but in English it basically means like the wonderful, valuable rafts that we all together can hopefully reach the other shore of wisdom and the cessation of suffering. But in order to enlighten our citizens or people, then we need the leadership and the guidance of wonderful teachers. So the journey for Tung Yuen and also our affiliated founders and directors, we have embarked upon a long journey over the last many decades, like from primary schools to secondary school to undergraduate program, postgraduate program, and also Buddhist centers across different universities in the world. It is also multidisciplinary. We have specialties in Buddhism and art. We have now, although there are many other patrons, but also we are also supportive of Buddhism and counseling. In Harvard, the foundations have been supportive of Buddhist ministries and pastoral care, etc., etc. I think the idea is, of course, we focus on the fundamental secular educations, but also like in terms of tertiary educations, how we can take the research and applications beyond that. Here I call, in closing, one of the message from our honorary chairman. His ambition is to see centers of Buddhist studies in universities and gradually one by one to develop link between them, forming a Buddhist knowledge network. So I think here at closing, thank you for everyone being part of this important network, and hopefully we can continue to take this journey to bring wisdom-oriented educations to the world for the benefit of all sentient beings. So thank you.
Thank you very much for Dr. Ng's presentation and also for sharing with us Tung Yuen's aspiration, effort, and dedication in Buddhist education. So I think we all rejoice in Tung Yuen's effort all these years in promoting this wisdom-oriented education. Thank you so much.